Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And when Trump announced his cartoon villain level tariffs around the world, and then a 90-day pause to allow countries to think about their balance of trade, he said that governments were banging on his door to work on quick trade deals. Where are they? His 90-day pause is over in 1 week. Looks like he's not going to have any real comprehensive trade deals at all. So what's Trump's plan to be able to sell something to the American public, who are already starting to suspect that voting for the Oompa Loompa of vengeance wasn't necessarily their best move? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So I see from a report in the Financial Times that some people involved in the trade talks with various countries accept they're not actually going to get any real trade agreements. So far, all they have is one very basic trade deal with the UK, which Trump hyped the hell out of when it was announced, but it's just a deal to reduce tariffs in both directions a little bit. But as the US has a trade surplus with the UK, no matter how you measure it, there was no great triumph for Trump, no matter how you slice it. The MAGA core will probably cheer anything Trump decides to announce next Wednesday, such is the nature of a cult. But this is about those voters who fell for Trump's logic on trade policy, but still expect to see results. At the beginning, he was going to get completely revised, comprehensive trade agreements with dozens of countries, like 90 countries in 90 days, that's what he said, to shift the balance of trade back in America's favour. Somehow missed them all, that America's the most dominant economy in the world already. But there it is. But Trump and his trade gimp came up with some childlike calculations which made it look like the USA was getting killed on trade somehow. So Trump really needs something to show he's addressed it. The White House had already said weeks ago, actually, that it doesn't look like there's going to be time to get quite 90 trade deals in 90 days, but it doesn't look like they're going to get any. Now, if you're a member of the American public watching this, I think you'd expect that he would prioritise the countries which are deemed to be the worst offenders, right? If you're going to accept, well, we can't get trade deals with all 90. I mean, the Penguins have been really obstinate. Then you would focus on the low-hanging fruit, which is surely those countries where the trade balance is most out of whack against America's interests, yeah? In reality, I suspect he's just going to work on those countries which are most willing to agree something. In the first half of his pause, he famously stopped UK talks, remember, because he was upset that he wasn't getting what he wanted. He said he was prioritising countries like South Korea. Wasn't long before he was then holding his big show in the Oval Office with Keir Starmer on speakerphone to hail a comprehensive trade agreement with the UK. It's like, no, mate, it's just a deal on tariffs. And even then, nothing at the time had been signed. It was only formalised recently. It's only come into force this week. But it was an early sign that Trump's gambit had failed. He saw tariffs as a way of making foreigners pay for US public spending, so he could reduce taxes in America and foreigners would pay for their living. But it ended up just costing Americans, just as the economists warned. The dollar has now fallen faster in the first 6 months of 2025 than at any time in the last 50 years. Things just aren't going the way Trump thought they would. Like many lazy heads of government before him, he thought he just had to make out like the tough guy, snap his fingers, suddenly everything would be different. But Trump's not a tough guy. He's an incredibly weak and feeble man trying to act tough. The same man who got Daddy to let him escape the draft with a fantasy element is now under the thumb of Xi, Putin and Netanyahu. In fact, it's hard to really count too many international wins for Trump. He has persuaded European NATO members to massively boost defence spending. Now, that's not automatically a win for America because it means the USA will have less influence on the world stage in the coming years because it derives a lot of its influence from security guarantees, right? It means that their wealthy customers in Europe also will not be able to afford to buy as much American stuff because, sorry, they were spending it on defence equipment. Oh, but they'll be spending it on American defence equipment. Well, not that much. But it is something Trump set out to do and he's achieved it, so he can chalk that one up as a win. But everything else seems to have gone to shit, doesn't it? 90 deals in 90 days is what he said. Now, fortunately for him, there is a technical difference between a trade deal and a trade agreement, and the vast majority of people don't know the difference. And the deal is the easiest to get. A deal is literally just anything you agree on trade. Like, or you just have to agree anything on trade, and that's a trade deal. Trade agreements, they're the comprehensive ones, which Trump won't get any of. So Trump can get deals and call them agreements, and no one will know the difference apart from economists going, it's not quite correct. By the sounds of it, he is going to get some deals like he has with the UK, some minor arrangement with the promise of a more comprehensive agreement in the future. But what happens after the 90 days to those countries without deals? Because he's not going to get 90 week deals either, or 89 left because the UK's done, I suppose. He's not going to get another 89 UK level week deals. There are going to be countries where he gets no deal at all, anything. Now, that is surely key to Trump's strongman image, isn't it? So let's say he gets some sort of, I don't know, piss poor basic deals with maybe half a dozen countries, maybe even a dozen, I don't know, with the promise that talks will continue on something bigger later on. Okay, he can leave those alone. He can say, well, they're playing ball, we'll leave those, right? He can sell that as a win. After all, he'll have something maybe on paper to show for his threatened trade war. Nothing yet. He's got a week to go. But he targeted 90 countries. What happens to the countries, which surely will be the vast majority of them, where he doesn't even get a weak start to a trade deal? Will he come the tough guy again and raise their tariffs back to the levels announced in April? I think that's what supporters of his scheme would expect. After all, if he says he's going to pause the higher rate of tariffs for 90 days to give them time to negotiate, and they don't agree anything in that 90 days, surely he can't leave the tariffs where they are. Otherwise, where is the incentive for them to take him seriously in future? So because there aren't going to be many deals struck in the next week, Trump really ought to be raising tariffs again, right? But although this would indeed be disastrous for the individual countries affected, it would also be disastrous for the USA. In fact, the only thing which will stop the US stock market crashing through the floor again next Wednesday, if he does that, will probably be investors holding on and maybe actually buying if stocks drop in the expectation that Trump will chicken out again. But this article in the FT suggests that the US will accept agreements in principle. So it may well be that Trump spends next Wednesday cheering a whole mess of new trade deals, which are on close inspection, just a load of countries going, yeah, we're not opposed in principle to getting new trade deals, we're just not quite ready yet. An agreement to commit to something later. Very much like the way he hailed the trade deal with the UK, which when he announced it, nothing had been signed. That was a deal in principle, nothing on paper. And what was later signed was the weakest sort of trade deal imaginable. Valuable to the businesses affected, I'm not saying not worth doing, but nothing that shifts the dial on overall trade for either country. And this is what we can expect next week. Another smoke and mirrors show where Trump hails comprehensive trade agreements, which turn out to not even be technically weak trade deals at the time, because very little, if anything, will be signed. And because whatever Trump announces will be very thin gruel, he's surely going to have to raise some tariffs back up to show he means business. But unlike the childishly ridiculous way he applied tariffs last time, this time he's going to have to employ someone with a bit more finesse. Because if he's going to play the tariff game, he's going to need to raise tariffs on sectors which won't bite him on the arse. Which is uncomfortable for the target market, but not the US market, or at least not the part of the market that's politically important for him, if that's possible. And he's also going to need to work out what he does about the EU. See, just like China, Trump seems to have a particular hatred for the EU. Not quite so much as with China, and maybe European leaders agreeing to big defence budget boosts will be taken into account there. Because his attempt to beat China down ended up with China coming out on top. There's not a lot said about that, but as far as I can tell, China is the only one that's actually gained something it didn't have at the start of the year. But he's still going to need a strategy for the EU. He claims the US has a trade deficit with them. Like, he doesn't claim he has a trade deficit with the UK, and yet he still wanted to deal with us. He does claim that the EU are taking advantage of the US. So he's going to look weak, isn't he, if he gets no agreement and takes no further action? And one of the biggest barriers to the trade talks, according to the article, is that foreign negotiators just don't know what Trump's strategy is. Largely, I suspect, because neither does he. His supporters think his unpredictability is a strength, right? It's absolutely not in this case. When people are negotiating, they need to know what the various possible outcomes are in order to judge the value of concessions. For example, going back to that UK deal. So we dropped tariffs on US beef in return for lower tariffs on British cars. Now, that wouldn't have been a good move if UK negotiators thought Trump might drop tariffs on everyone else's cars for basically nothing. I mean, imagine the situation. Keir Starmer would look like a right fool, wouldn't he? He goes, OK, we'll drop tariffs on US beef. You drop them on UK cars. Great. And then if later on Trump drops them on everyone else's cars without having to get anything in return for himself, we would look like a right tit because we'd have dropped the price on US beef and got no long-term benefit at all. So British negotiators need to be assured that Trump intended to keep his 25% tariffs for anyone not doing a deal with him in order that the UK actually got something out of the deal. Otherwise, we'd look like tits. Same applies to other countries. They're obviously willing to concede some things in return for maintaining decent trade with the USA. But they need to know what they're getting in return is only possible with those concessions, and it's not something he's just going to give to everyone else in time anyway. And Trump's lack of a coherent strategy is making that very difficult. So negotiators do not know what they're really negotiating for. And one of the biggest barriers to Trump getting what he wants from these trade talks is actually Trump's methods in seeking them. It's his own incompetence and the incompetence of those monkeys he has advising him, which are actually making it harder to achieve what might have been possible aims had he gone about it in the right way. All we really know is that Trump is going to announce some pathetic deals, which aren't really deals next week, and will certainly not be trade agreements. And he'll probably have to raise some tariffs to show he means business against countries for which he got no agreement. The question is, how much will he raise them? That may indicate whether he's learning yet that tariffs hurt the country which applies them. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.